Hello and welcome to this video all around application lifecycle management and solutions within Power Platform and Power Platform administration. So focusing on this part of the graph down here, of this diagram down here, application lifecycle management. So why do we care about application lifecycle management? Well, we want our resources, our pro dev team, our citizen developers to be doing more of the blue stuff and less of the red stuff. And application lifecycle management is about trying to make sure that this line is over here and not over here. So application lifecycle management is important for that purpose. And solutions are a way of packaging apps. And a good, I'm not sure of this analogy actually, now thinking a bit more, I guess, oh, actually, no, I do know why. So in dev, it doesn't matter if it's a mess. Dev absolutely doesn't matter if it's a mess at all. It can be a messy desk, can be all that kind of stuff. But as soon as you get to test, you want to avoid test becoming like dev. So dev is where you do the playground, it's a total mess, you do whatever you want in dev. But then when you go to test it with real data, that needs to be pristine and managed. And that's what solutions help you do. Because if you've got a messy desk, you don't know if the code's broken or the environment's broken. Was the environment already broken? Did something else break in that test environment? Is there a component missing from the test environment? Is a component in the test environment out of date that's in the dev environment? We've all been there. I've built solutions in various things in a previous life, and I've been in this dev test hell, absolutely. But you need to test an application before you release it to prod, absolutely. But the dev test, if you're not strict between the boundaries, it can get really hard to test and know what's going on. So the answer to this is solutions. And in a solution file, so you have a publisher that creates within an environment, you have a publisher. And then the publisher creates these solution files, and in these solution files are all these different types of objects. So you put all of them in that relate to a solution. So for example, a solution might have an AI model. It might have a PowerApp. It might have a few flow connectors. It might have some tables in Dataverse. It might have some option sets. It might have some email templates. Put all of those in that one solution file owned by a publisher, and then you can transport that solution from environment to environment, from dev test prod, for example, and things like dependencies, things like version control, release management is all controlled by solutions and by the environment. Publishers define the ownership of the component when it's brought to a new system. Publishers control the ability to extend the component or lock it down. So they control whether a solution is editable or not. So solutions require a publisher. They can be associated with multiple solutions, so it's one-to-many in a publisher. But a solution can only have one publisher. There are two default publishers are included. There's a CDS default publisher for Dataverse, and there is a default publisher for the organization that you're with. Don't use a default publisher, create your own. Use the same publisher in all of your solutions. The publisher dictates the customizations prefix and the option set values. So it's really important to know that when you import new assets through a managed solution, the publisher owns those assets. So when you publish and export a solution, the destination import, the publisher will own those assets. So it's important to know that. So they package and maintain components that make up the PowerApp. Solutions are authored by a publisher, and the solution contains these things, these objects. Lots of different types of objects can be in a solution. Another fundamental about solutions is when you export a solution, there's two options. You can export as an unmanaged solution, which is for moving between dev environments. If you want to move from your personal developer environment into the team's developer environment, the team developer environment, then you would export as an unmanaged solution, because then when you import it, you can then edit, play around with it. You can do anything on that within the objects of that unmanaged solution. Consider those to be your source code. You then have managed solutions, and these you can deploy to an environment outside of development. So as soon as they go into test or UAT, systems integration test, I'd imagine that is, or production, you want to be using managed solutions. Generate by a build server and consider as a build artifact. Now this is a bit DevOps for me, but I assume that they are specific DevOps terms that you'll be familiar with if you're familiar with DevOps. So they should be generated by a build server and considered as a build artifact. There are some default solutions. The default solution, called default solution, it's automatically provided for new environments, contains a list of all the components in the system. So you wouldn't work and change anything in there generally. There's over 1,000 components supporting the base. The common data service default solution is also automatically created, and it's empty without anything. When you make changes from the PowerApps Maker portal, this is the solution that will contain any of those changes by default. The recommended approach is to create a new solution, a custom solution, to put all of your app requirements, all of your app components inside it. So in the example here, this Contoso Asset Management, that is a custom solution. So what's in a custom solution? So when making changes or creating new components, you should always start from within the custom solution you created for your project. You should always start from that custom. So don't go to the editors, go to the solution. And in fact, the solution editor has been changed recently, and it's a really, really user-friendly interface. You can separate by objects, and I recommend you go and have a browse around of that, or check out some of our Build Your Own Solution course. Gets into that as well. You can see that in the course that's on this academy. So they are categorized to track, so categorized by cloud flows or by PowerApps or by tables. You can see all of that in the solution. And they can include tables, not entities, tables, apps, both model apps and model-driven and canvas apps, flows, security components, connectors, custom connectors, developer assets. Some components are subcomponents. Forms, views, fields are subcomponents of entities, and they are part of the solution as well. Or they'll be dependencies of that solution. Reference data is not included as a solution component, by the way. So if you've got reference data in your tables, it isn't part of the solution component. So you can see here, there's actually more improvements come since this slide. You can see how all of the objects are listed on the left-hand side there, down here. So, and then you can filter out based on those particular things. But this is now even tidier. It's really, really kind of neat now. Here's an example. This solution, device ordering. You'll see it's got a couple of apps. It's got some security roles. It's got tables. They're now called tables, and it's got some flows. Processes a flow, and it's got a business process. And here they are listed in the solution. Solution components can depend on other assets, and solution components can be required by other assets. So you may have a solution that's in other solutions, or there might be there might be things in that particular object that are dependent on something that's in a different solution. And this option here, show dependencies, will show you where those dependencies are, which is really good. And also things like solution checker, we'll talk about in a second, will scan and check for those dependencies as well. There's a relatively new thing called environment variables that you can configure at a solution level. So you can say things like, okay, we've got a from email and an auto approve. So in development and test, what we want to do is have development from emails and test from emails, so that any approvals that are generated come straight from that test account. And also one it's just auto approve all the way through the flow, because we're just going to be testing the flow. So we have a variable called auto approve, and then in our flows we're saying if auto approve is yes, just jump straight to the next call. So you can code that stuff up in dev and test and have those as solution variables, solution environment variables. So when you export that into import that into an environment, you're prompted for these environment variables. I believe they may be called settings now, but they behave like this. They're just environment variables. There's this concept of solution layering. So there's what the user sees first of all, and then there are unmanaged solutions at the top of those. The user can do things with those. They're unmanaged. A user can potentially do things with those. Then there's a managed layer. Now in the unmanaged layer, you can have different solutions that are using same components across them, and they're just unmanaged. It's just like a Wild West thing. Doesn't really matter. But once you get to a managed solution, any shared components create their own instance inside that layer. And the user can't do anything with those. They can't do anything at all with them. And then of course you've got underneath that, you've got the base Dataverse entities, the system solution, system layers, all of that stuff. So there's it's almost like there are copies taken of those base entities into a managed solution, as well as any dependencies are copied into that or referenced in that managed solution as well. So there's a lot more control over these layers as you go up the stack there. Unmanaged are just like Wild West. You would not use those in a production environment at all. In our module on environments and security, in the security module, we talk through an environment strategy. So I highly recommend that you go and look at that. Where this is relevant for here is once you've determined your environment strategy, how do you move artifacts between these particular environments, right? How do you do that? And this is where DevOps comes in, and DevOps plays a role. What you want to do is, so you've got this in a development environment. You can export as unmanaged or export as managed. You can import as unmanaged into any development environment. You might have more than one dev environment down here. Export and import as unmanaged, that's totally fine. But once you get to moving to test, a threshold is crossed and you only import as managed. And same when you're going from test to prod, you only import as managed. So there's this life cycle, application life cycle with solutions. Now how you do this is simple. You just in the solution file export it and do all of this stuff. So here's a developer, pretend my environment. So you can do this using zip files and export and import, but what about things like version control? What's changed? Like what has changed in an environment, right? So you can, this is one way of, so for say in this environment here, say you just, it's a small solution down here, you might want to just manage that with zip files. This critical application here, you might want to implement some more stringent controls over what's changed, like between different versions, certain release control and change management. You want to implement that for critical. So for this non-critical important environments, what you might want to do is just do this. Export as zip, import, export, import. They're important, but they're not crucial in terms of like, we don't need to know at what particular time a particular component change. It doesn't really matter. We just need to export and import and get it working. However, for the critical app, you might need a different environment. You might have a different strategy. You might have different developers working on things, and then you might want to put that into source control. You then want to build. So build either a managed solution or an unmanaged solution, and then deploy to test, and then deploy to prod. So you might want to do it like this. And what build means here is it exports it as a managed solution, unpacks the zip file, checks all that into source control, creates a release, and then packages it back up and sends that to test. And then you've got that release of all those different components checked into source control. And you can do all of that good stuff of, comparing things and seeing what changed per release without having to dig into zip files. So you might want to do that for certain critical apps, or you might want to employ it across the whole board. It's totally up to you for your strategy. So here's some good practices. If you're doing stuff already and you're doing any of this stuff, stop it and implement this. Solutions, good, common publisher, segmented layers. What's bad is just using the default publisher and not using solutions at all. So make sure you're using solutions. Deployment, use managed solutions to move them between environments, and use automated processes where it's appropriate. Like obviously where the effort risk, leave that call to yourself. But if you want to implement DevOps stuff, then that's a good idea to do that. The bad stuff there, like unmanaged or no solutions at all, but even if the process isn't automated, do have a deployment process so that then it doesn't differ by developer. What's the source of truth? You've got source control if you're using managed solutions, and you've got some sort of process that's saving the zip files somewhere so you can dig into them if you need to, or you're using a DevOps process, DevOps pipelines. What's bad is just using a magic environment. What's the source of truth, right? Dev environments should be disposable. They should be isolated. They should be, throw away. Doesn't matter if they disappear. If any of your dev environments are shared, shared beyond what they need to be, and if they are being relied on as a source of truth for something, then that's a bad practice and you need to fix that as well. Just a little bit more on the DevOps stuff, which might be of interest to some people. This is the kind of thing that you want to do for deployment, and we can automate this stuff here using DevOps. So you export them. So you export them. So this is the best practice for application lifecycle management. I'm going to dig a little bit more into the DevOps side of things. So you repeat this stuff here for high-level deployment tasks. So you export and import solutions. I wouldn't recommend ignore that individual resources. I wouldn't recommend doing that, so ignore that. Always put it in a solution. There are gaps in application lifecycle management. This slide is quite a bit old, so go here and make sure you read this as part of your research for doing these doing this stuff. Just make sure you do that. Here are some tools that are available. So you've got PowerApps build tools that I'll talk about in a second. You've got configuration migration tools. You've got solution packager, package deployer, the web API for Dataverse, and you've got solution checker. We'll talk about a few of those. There is a solution checker that will check to make sure that things are okay inside the solution. Are all the dependencies there? Are all the connections there? All of that stuff. Performance, stability, reliability issues with solutions. Click on that link to read more about that. Solution Health Hub. Validate configuration, resolve problems by taking pre-corrective action. Have a look at that as well. So these tools here, Google each of these and have a look at these. The one I'm going to focus on a little bit more is PowerApps build tools. What these allow you to do is create these things called DevOps pipelines. If this is of interest, there's a really good PowerCap video that will be in the resources. Just click on the chat bubble and we'll link you to that. And so this is application lifecycle management powered by DevOps and GitHub. So what you can do is create these workflows in GitHub or in Azure DevOps pipelines that will do this sort of stuff. So it can, create an environment, it can deploy dependencies, it can do all of this kind of stuff. So you have this, build these pristine development environments daily, create them daily with the latest versions of these particular solutions. You can then deploy these off to test environments that can do things like run a unit tests on each of the particular components. It can run PowerApps Checker. It can run Solution Health Hub. It can run all these different things and unpack to the repository in GitHub. So you've got version control for each individual component. And then when you're going into release, can do the same thing again and automate these pipelines. It's a really powerful thing, but it is a lot of setup and it's very technical. I do get the high level concepts, but when you get down to the level of things like YAML and things like that, it's way beyond me. But it is very useful to set this up for critical apps, really, really critical apps. Otherwise, the built-in solution stuff is really useful. And we've gone through that already. Don't need to go through any of this. The only thing here that is quite useful, you can use a service principal with connectors. You just need to go and change. When you create a connector, the ellipsis there, you can add a new connection, and then there's a connect here with service principal. And you can connect using an app service principal that you've created in Azure AD. So yep, this is where you go and do it. That's another common question for developers. And COE Starter Kit, if you've not watched the COE Starter Kit, check that out as well. Lots of good stuff for developers that might be useful as they're building out apps as well. That's it. That's Application Lifecycle Management, and that is the last module in the course. So join me for the wrap up, and thank you for watching.